Here is a little story about a podcaster who gives 2 weeks notice.
Gorgeous, baby. You're gorgeous.
This is the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. The show that everybody's talking about. The show that will become a necessary part of your weekly mental diet. The show that picks up where JoshRolfe.com leaves off. The show title that uses the word podcast 4 times. Introducing your host, Josh Rolfe.
After wasting so much time on this podcast, I've added it up. I have 80, this is episode 83. USA. After, what was I saying? Oh yeah, this is episode 83, and if you add up all of the minutes of this show, it equals about 3 days worth. So if you listened at 1x speed, the actual speed in which I recorded, it would take you about 72, I think it was 70 hours. It could have been 80 hours. And 72 hours, for all of you mathematicians out there, is 3 days. But I've been strong-armed to finally phase out this podcast, and it wasn't exactly by choice. I forget which episode that it was, either the podcast game or the one that I called The Last Show, an interview with Tyler Oborn. That wasn't really my last show. Right around then, I got a call. And the call was to schedule a time to meet in the publisher's office for this podcast. And for those of you unfamiliar, when you record a podcast, you can just let it sit there on your computer, or you can publish it to a host. And so I have a publisher, and it had been a while since me and my publisher had a work meeting in his office. So I was really eager to hear what he had to say. I got all prepared, dressed up a little bit, did my hair all cool, what hairs are left. And I walked in at the appointed time. He told me to close the door and didn't even wait for me to sit down when he started reading me the riot act. I did this wrong. I did that wrong. I used bad grammar, too many ums and uhs. Podcast didn't make sense. He was just rambling this rant. And then he began talking about how he climbed some mountain I've never heard of, and then quoted a guy named Seamus, who I think used to be his neighbor. I was incredibly confused by the entire dialogue, an unintelligible mass of words spewing from his mouth. I'm visual, so when most people speak, it's an unintelligible mass of words, but it was a highly unintelligible mass of words. After a minute or so of this nonsensical rambling, it became very clear that he was actually going to fire me. Especially the part when he said, "So it's time to start packing up your things." At that point, the visualization, it didn't matter. I got what he was saying. Pack up your things. We don't need you anymore. You can't keep podcasting this garbage. Those are actual quotes. That's when it all happened. I really surprised myself because I interrupted my boss and said, with a slight smile, as nonchalantly as possible, I said, "You know what?" And right then he just stopped. He stopped the lecture. There was no more words. He just seemed amazingly still, really, sitting behind his mahogany desk, gazing directly into my eyes. It was a power thing, and he had power over me. But I had asked this question. I said, you know what? And I hoped he would answer. Why did I hope he would answer me? I mean, the man was never at a loss for words. And then I thought, you know what? Isn't that an expression that tells the listener you have more to say? I thought that by trying to be as cool as I could, asking that question, you know what? That he would answer me. I thought he would tell me something that he knows. I forgot how the expression worked. How did I do that? I can't believe I didn't realize that. It must have been the nerves of the moment. No wonder he hates my podcast. I don't even know expressions. Before I had this realization, before that moment, kind of after the, you know what, and before I realized what I had done, for a moment there, he kind of had this look of panic, as if I had thrown him. He didn't look like my boss anymore. He looked weak. He looked like me. This gave me a dose of much needed confidence, but I was still at a loss for words. You know what? I repeated, still thinking he would answer the question. Still before I had realized what I had done. I continued to endure unbearable silence for well over a minute. He was enduring it effortlessly, making him look like my boss again. So I thought of my options. There weren't many. He had told me to pack my bags. He was essentially firing me, but he hadn't yet said, "You're fired." So, ever the competitive one, I didn't want him to beat me to it, so I yelled at the top of my lungs, "I quit!" Motionless, emotionless, and in his thick Colorado accent, he said, "You're an idiot." To which I threw this back. I said, "Don't sugarcoat this. You heard me. I quit. I'm not sticking around, slaving away for you anymore." "You can't quit," he told me. "Why can't I quit? I can do whatever the heck I want." He told me I was correct about that, and then he added, "When you quit, you won't be able to collect unemployment insurance. I don't care about Josh," he stopped me mid-sentence, "do the right thing." "What right thing?" I said. "I am out." I put my hand on his office doorknob, but surprised myself again when I didn't turn it immediately to open the door and leave his office for good. He was right. When I considered it, he was right. And I was really hopeful to get a hold of that unemployment check. Maybe this unemployment thing was a way I could monetize the podcast, I thought. How ironic is that? I laughed to myself, my back to him. Then I heard him say words that were as if a knife had been thrown into the center of my back. "You know I don't need you," he continued in that evilly calm voice. "You know I don't like your work. To be blunt, it's pathetic. For 3 years, you've been churning out episode after episode. No one listens. No one cares. You're as pathetic as they come. You should have never been born." I turned around, facing him, quickly checking my torso to see if the knife had passed all the way through. It hadn't. Then I remembered the knife wasn't real. Knife in the back is a figure of speech. I had forgotten. My confidence waning, I no longer could look him in the eyes. I said, "I thought you wanted me to do the right thing and stay." He was actually listening at this point, and I garnered a little more courage and said, "Instead, you mock my work. You know I'm the best podcaster you've got. All the others, they don't know how it's done. They're young. They're inexperienced. They think they have all the answers, but all they have is ad revenue from Audible. I felt this heat sear my face, beginning at my forehead and quickly blanketing my entire head and neck. I'm sure my face was bright red. That's a genetic characteristic attributed to my Nordic roots. I tried to cover my Nordic face at that time with my hands. Maybe he would think if I did that I was about to cry. I was about to cry. Do the right thing, he said. Give me 2 weeks' notice. Oh. I hesitated, trying to understand what had happened. Oh. So he didn't want me to collect unemployment? He wanted me to earn my pay for 2 more weeks? Wait, what's happening? I thought. I was getting more confused by the minute. When you quit, do you get unemployment? Or when you don't quit, do you? I knew he would counteroffer. Just not so soon. It was instantly clear, though, who had won this dance. Then fine, I said, acting disappointed. I left his office, headed to mine, down in the basement of the large office complex, full of podcasters. And it was a mess down there, as usual. I faked being mad. I threw things around. Then I cleaned things up. And that's basically how it happened. I have 2 more weeks to podcast. Then I'm back on the street. For 3 years, I've never not podcasted. So this will be a real transition for me. I ask you for your understanding as I transition to becoming a normal person, a non-podcaster, which will be oh so difficult. There will likely be normalizing pains, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes in order to no longer podcast in 2 weeks. These events were entirely fictional and based on a true blog post written by me, the me of 2 years ago or 3 years ago. When did I write that? 3 years ago? That wasn't real. That also wasn't real. And it's found at rol.ph/1h. If you haven't given this review, I would so appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. I'm going to keep saying it, whether it happens or not. So I thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. For more information, visit joshpodcast.com. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Rolfe. That's Rolfe, R-O-L-P as in podcast, H. Now go and have the best day and night ever. And have fun.